A dead woman left her a decaying, debt-ridden tenement. But when Eleanor finally forced the rusted front door open, she didn't find an empty tomb. She found a hidden, illegal empire. What was waiting for her inside? Stay with me on this one. The wax seal on the envelope broke with a dry snap. Inside lay a heavy parchment deed. It transferred ownership of a massive, debt-ridden property. The benefactor was Clara. A great-aunt Eleanor had met exactly 2 times in her entire life. The old woman had bypassed a dozen eager, ambitious relatives. Instead, she left this decaying behemoth to the one person actively trying to fade away. Why bequeath a ruined tenement to a woman who had not purchased a new piece of clothing in 3 years? Eleanor had stopped participating in life after the accident. The sudden loss of her husband had turned her apartment into a sterile waiting room. The clocks ticked. Time refused to move forward. Her existence became an exercise in minimal effort. She ate just enough to survive. She slept just enough to function. Ambition was a foreign concept. Hope felt like a physical burden. The address led to the forgotten industrial edge of the city. Rain slicked the uneven cobblestones. The building loomed 6 stories high. Its brick facade was severely scarred by decades of soot and municipal neglect. Eleanor stood on the cracked pavement. She felt absolutely no curiosity. A dull, familiar weight settled in her chest. This inheritance felt like a cruel joke. It was a massive iron anchor tossed to a drowning sailor. She approached the main entrance. The stone steps were deeply worn in the center. Generations of heavy work boots had carved a shallow valley into the granite. The door itself was solid, blackened oak. Thick iron bands reinforced the timber. The metal was coated in a thick layer of orange rust. Eleanor retrieved the heavy brass key from her coat pocket. She inserted it into the keyhole. It slid inward with a harsh, scraping sound. She attempted to turn it. The mechanism refused to yield. Years of total disuse had fused the internal brass pins together. Eleanor leaned her forehead against the damp, unyielding wood. The cold seeped directly into her skin. It perfectly matched the temperature of her own thoughts. Turning around was the logical choice. Walking away back to her silent apartment was easy. Surrender was her default state. Instead, her fingers tightened around the freezing brass handle. She adjusted her stance on the slippery stone. Eleanor threw her entire body weight against the oak panels. The impact bruised her right shoulder. The pain was sudden, sharp, and undeniable. It was the first genuine physical sensation she had registered in many months. Eleanor gritted her teeth. She twisted the key again with both hands. She used her hip as leverage against the heavy doorframe. The rusted metal groaned under the pressure. A loud, sharp crack echoed down the empty, rain-swept street. The lock finally gave way. The door did not simply swing open. Its bottom edge scraped violently against the swollen, warped floorboards inside. Eleanor wedged her bruised shoulder into the narrow gap. She shoved forward with a guttural exhale. Dust cascaded from the massive upper hinges. The smell of stale air and damp plaster rushed out to meet her. It was the distinct scent of a sealed tomb. Eleanor stepped over the rusted threshold. The hallway was immediately swallowed by deep shadows. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, driven by a broken hydraulic arm. The loud noise instantly severed her connection to the outside world. The hiss of street traffic vanished. Eleanor stood alone in the dark foyer. Her chest heaved, her hands trembled slightly from the raw exertion. The intense physical effort had forced her heart to pump faster. The emotional numbness temporarily retreated. A strange, unfamiliar adrenaline took its place. She looked around the cavernous space. Faint gray light filtered through a grime-caked transom window above the door. It revealed strips of peeling wallpaper hanging like dead skin. A grand, sweeping staircase dominated the center of the hall. The wooden banister was missing several carved spindles. To the naked eye, this place was entirely dead. The silence seemed absolute. Yet, as Eleanor stood perfectly still, she noticed something beneath her boots. A faint, rhythmic vibration hummed through the rotting floorboards. It was incredibly subtle, almost imperceptible. Deep within the cold walls, the building was breathing. The rusted hinges finally gave way. Eleanor stepped across the threshold. She braced herself for the chill of a dead building. Instead, a wave of dry heat hit her face. The scent of caramelized sugar and fermented yeast hung heavy in the air. The supposedly vacant property was breathing. Down the main corridor, a faint amber glow spilled from beneath a heavy oak door. Inside a former communal kitchen, 17-year-old Julian had built an underground empire. Sacks of high-protein flour were stacked against the peeling wallpaper. 2 salvaged industrial ovens hummed with steady, rhythmic power. Julian worked the dough with the precision of a seasoned mechanic. He did not flinch when Eleanor's shadow fell across the doorway. He simply scored the top of a sourdough loaf with a razor blade and slid it into the heat. This was not a temporary squat. It was a highly efficient production line. Every morning, 3 hours before sunrise, Julian slipped out through a modified basement grate. He delivered fresh artisan bread to 4 upscale cafes in the neighboring district. The cafe managers never asked about his commercial license. They only cared about the perfect crust and the reliable schedule. Julian reinvested his cash directly into the building. He bought copper wiring, fuses, and yeast. The electricity powering Julian's ovens required a massive energy draw. The city had severed the main grid connections 2 years ago. Eleanor followed the low, thumping vibration down the concrete stairwell. The temperature rose with every step. The basement resembled the engine room of a steamship. The Miller family had claimed the subterranean level. 8 people lived among the labyrinth of cast iron pipes and pressure valves. Arthur Miller, a former maritime engineer, had completely bypassed the dead municipal lines. He had retrofitted the building's ancient boiler to run on compressed sawdust, discarded shipping pallets, and dried organic waste. His 6 children operated as a flawless logistics unit. They scavenged fuel from the nearby industrial zone. They sorted the combustible materials by burn rate. They fed the roaring fire in strict 4-hour shifts. The building's veins ran hot because of their relentless physical labor. The radiators upstairs hissed, keeping the frost at bay. This was a closed biological loop. A perfect, illegal ecosystem. Julian provided the morning calories. The Millers provided the thermal survival. The baker traded fresh loaves for the coal-stained hands that maintained his water pressure. They had mapped every structural weakness of the house. They patched leaks before the ceiling plaster could rot. They were not destroying the property. They were preserving its skeleton. The heavy sound of Eleanor turning the rusted lock upstairs had been a signal, not a surprise. The squatters did not pack their bags. They did not scramble for the fire escapes. Arthur Miller simply wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag. Julian dusted the flour off his canvas apron. They possessed an absolute, unnerving confidence in their safety. They had watched Eleanor from the shadows for 3 weeks. They had seen her stand across the street, staring at the facade, paralyzed by her own ghosts. They recognized the heavy, exhausted posture of a survivor. People broken by profound loss do not evict the desperate. They seek anchors. The hidden residents understood a fundamental truth about urban survival. A property deed is just a piece of paper. A home is defined by the pulse inside it. Eleanor had come here to hide from the world, expecting a tomb. Instead, she walked into a functioning sanctuary. The outcasts had kept her inheritance alive through the winter. Now they stood their ground, waiting for the new owner to realize she needed their warmth just as much as they needed her walls. Thomas sacrificed a 20-year career at the municipal registry for 47 cardboard boxes. He dragged them into the abandoned East Wing under the cover of night. These containers hold no valuables in the traditional sense. They are packed with faded blueprints, redacted property deeds, and internal memos from the City Planning Commission. Thomas guards them with a feral intensity. He sleeps on a narrow cot, barricaded by stacks of manila folders. The documents map a deliberate, systematic erasure of the neighborhood's original grid. A massive corporate land grab was masked as urban renewal. Thomas found the discrepancy during a routine audit. He noticed overlapping dates and forged signatures on demolition orders. His superiors gave him a strict ultimatum to drop the inquiry. He chose the boxes instead. Now he spends his days cross-referencing parcel numbers under the light of a single kerosene lamp. He is building an airtight legal defense against an enemy that operates entirely in the shadows. His preservation methods border on mania. Thomas uses silica gel packets scavenged from shoe stores to fight the dampness. He irons crumpled eviction notices flat. He binds loose pages with surgical tape. The physical weight of the archive is threatening the structural integrity of the third floor. The wooden floorboards groan under the mass of thousands of pages. Thomas ignores the danger. He maps out a complex timeline on the cracked plaster wall using charcoal and red string. 2 floors above the paper fortress lives Elias. He was once a prominent fixture at the downtown jazz clubs. Now, Elias communicates solely through the brass bell of a tarnished trumpet. He has not spoken a single word in 9 years. A localized structural collapse took his vocal cords and his family. The official report blamed faulty wiring. Thomas's documents tell a different story about controlled, intentional demolitions. Elias knows the truth without reading a single page. He plays long, mournful notes at dusk. The sound travels through the building's exposed ventilation shafts. It acts as a mechanical clock for the hidden residents. His music maps the physical boundaries of their sanctuary. A sharp staccato warns of approaching footsteps outside. A slow, rolling melody signals safety. Elias uses pitch and rhythm to replace the vocabulary he lost. His silence is not a void. It is a highly calibrated defense mechanism. The archivist and the musician never interact directly. Yet, their survival is deeply intertwined. Thomas provides the intellectual armor. Elias provides the sensory perimeter. They are the silent witnesses of a forgotten space. Thomas sorts his evidence into 3 distinct categories. Green folders contain financial anomalies. Red folders hold building inspector reports. Black folders document the human cost of the property disputes. He is currently focused on a specific cluster of documents from the mid-70s. The municipal records from that era were officially destroyed in a convenient basement flood. Thomas possesses the only surviving carbon copies. Elias sits by his shattered window. He watches unfamiliar, sleek vehicles surveying the street below. He raises the trumpet to his lips. He does not play a jazz standard. He blows a single, dissonant chord. It is a precise acoustic match to the sound of bending steel. Thomas hears the signal. He immediately covers his timeline with a heavy canvas tarp. He locks the most sensitive black folders inside a cast-iron safe. The internal ecosystem shifts from passive existence to active lockdown. The trauma of the past is no longer just a memory. It is a tangible currency within these walls. Thomas's obsessive cataloging turns grief into actionable data. Elias's mute vigilance turns sorrow into an early warning system. They have transformed their broken lives into a fortress. The boxes are the foundation of an impending war. Mr. Sterling wore a bespoke charcoal suit. His leather shoes left no scuff marks on the dusty floorboards of the foyer. He represented Vanguard Developments. He did not raise his voice. He made no overt threats. Instead, he placed a thick manila folder on the makeshift lobby table. The brass clasp of his briefcase clicked shut with absolute finality. Inside the folder lay eviction notices. They were printed on heavy, cream-colored paper. Sterling offered a buyout. The financial sum was substantial. The deadline was 48 hours. His smile never reached his pale eyes. He mentioned the building's structural instability. He cited specific municipal safety codes regarding load-bearing walls. Every word acted as a velvet-gloved hammer. Eleanor watched his hands. They were perfectly manicured. They lacked any calluses or scars. He did not belong in this fragile ecosystem of survival. He was an invasive species. Sterling made a single, crucial mistake before turning to leave. He referred to the basement as the lower boiler room. Current city zoning plans labeled that area as a generic storage sublevel. Only the original architectural drafts from the mid-20th century used his exact terminology. Eleanor caught the slip immediately. Sterling understood the building's hidden anatomy. He knew it far better than a standard property assessor should. Eleanor waited for his black sedan to turn the corner. She took the folder. She ignored the generous financial offer. She focused entirely on the legal letterhead. Vanguard Developments was merely a subsidiary. She traced the corporate lineage through online public registries. Shell companies hid behind anonymous holding firms. The digital paper trail was deliberately convoluted. The path finally led to a defunct entity. It was called Meridian Enterprises. Meridian had attempted to purchase this exact block decades earlier. Eleanor left the building. She visited the Central Municipal Archives. She requested the property transfer logs for the decade of the 1970s. The microfilm reader hummed in the quiet room. Dust motes danced in the harsh light of the screen. She scrolled through years of mundane tax records. A glaring anomaly appeared. A single folio was missing from the winter records of 1975. Eleanor cross-referenced the missing folio with local newspaper microfiche. She spent 6 hours scanning blurred headlines. A small article finally caught her attention. It sat buried on page 14 of a late November issue. A young woman named Beatrice Vance had been reported missing. Beatrice was the last holdout tenant of this very building during the Meridian buyout attempt. She worked as an independent art restorer. She lived in apartment number 4. The archived police report noted absolutely no signs of a struggle. Her heavy winter coat was still hanging in the hall. Her passport lay untouched on the kitchen counter. A half-finished canvas sat on an easel. The official investigation stalled after 2 weeks. The case grew cold. Meridian Enterprises quietly dissolved shortly after the disappearance. The building fell into municipal limbo. Eleanor printed the archived article. She placed it next to Sterling's modern eviction notice. The typography was different. The era was different. The underlying tactic remained identical. Sterling's parent company shared 3 board members with the defunct Meridian. The names were passed down through wealthy families. Capital preserved its dark secrets through inheritance. Beatrice Vance did not simply move away in 1975. She became an obstacle to a lucrative development project. Someone permanently removed that obstacle. Now, Vanguard Developments was finishing a job started nearly 50 years ago. The polite man in the charcoal suit acted as the heir to a violent legacy. His elegant demeanor masked a ruthless historical pattern. Eleanor looked at the shadows stretching across the hallway. The building was not just a neglected shelter. It was an active crime scene. The rust on the door hinges felt less like decay. It felt like a protective seal. The hidden bakery and the quiet boiler room operators faced immediate danger. Sterling's polite deadline served as a countdown to erasure. Yielding meant becoming another missing folio. Beatrice vanished in complete silence. Eleanor decided to break that silence. She gathered the printed records. She locked the heavy front door. Corporate pressure relied entirely on isolation and fear. Eleanor prepared to drag their buried history into the harsh light of day. She would not let the past repeat itself. Yielding meant becoming another missing folio. But Eleanor wasn't about to vanish in silence. If you want to see how she takes down a corrupt corporate machine without hiring a single lawyer, hit that subscribe button, because where this goes next is worth staying for. A corporate machine expects submission. It thrives on silence and panic. The developers scheduled a fake structural inspection for Tuesday morning. Their goal was simple: condemn the property, evict the ghosts, and bulldoze the history. They underestimated the power of faded ink. They failed to account for a woman who had nothing left to lose. Eleanor decided to break the silence. She turned her grief into a weapon. She spread the 1975 blueprints across the cracked linoleum of the main hall. Dust motes danced in the shafts of morning light. Eleanor cross-referenced the architectural plans with the property deeds. Thomas, the archivist, had preserved everything. The math did not add up. The corporate claim relied on a zoning loophole. That loophole was closed exactly 42 years ago. The developers had forged the chain of title. Eleanor found the fatal discrepancy. It hid in the margins of a yellowed municipal tax ledger. A single missing signature from a deceased city clerk invalidated the entire eviction notice. The corporate lawyers had gotten sloppy. They assumed no one would read the dead files. They were wrong. Knowledge alone was useless without a delivery system. Eleanor needed the building's hidden ecosystem. She walked down to the basement. The teenage baker stopped kneading his illegal dough. The large family maintaining the ancient boiler turned off the valves. Eleanor did not ask for pity. She did not offer false hope. She handed out tactical assignments. The baker's morning delivery routes transformed. His bread baskets now carried sealed envelopes. Arthur Miller knew the city's underground maintenance tunnels. He mapped the blind spots around the developer's glass headquarters. The residents became a synchronized intelligence network. Direct confrontation in a courtroom was suicide. The developers had expensive legal teams on retainer. They could stall a lawsuit for decades. Eleanor chose an asymmetric strike. She bypassed the compromised local authorities. She targeted independent investigative journalists. She did not send a desperate, emotional plea. Editors ignore those. She sent a fully indexed, undeniable archive. The package included the forged deeds. It contained the 1975 police report regarding the original owner's disappearance. It featured high-resolution photographs of the thriving, hidden community inside the supposedly abandoned structure. She provided a pre-packaged scandal. Timing was her ultimate weapon. Eleanor leaked the documents exactly 12 hours before the scheduled raid. She gave the press just enough time to verify the facts. She gave the corporate lawyers zero time to secure an injunction. Tuesday morning arrived with heavy gray clouds. 3 black sedans parked outside the rusted iron gates. 5 men stepped out. They wore pristine white hard hats and carried official-looking clipboards. They were private contractors, hired to falsify a condemnation report. They expected to find a deserted, decaying ruin. They expected to kick in a rotting door. Instead, they walked right into a trap. 3 local news vans were already parked in the courtyard. Their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky. Red recording lights blinked on heavy shoulder cameras. Eleanor stood squarely on the rusted threshold. She held the original, legally binding building charter in her hands. Elias, the silent jazz musician, stood behind her. He played a slow, deliberate, unyielding melody on his tarnished trumpet that acted as a sonic anchor. The rhythm held the moment. It was a live broadcast. The lead inspector froze on the concrete steps. His intimidation script was suddenly useless. The glare of the camera lenses paralyzed him. Eleanor stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She spoke with absolute, terrifying clarity. She cited the specific municipal code the contractors were violating. She named the offshore shell company funding their operation. She held up the proof of the forged signature. The journalists recorded every single syllable. The microphones caught the nervous shifting of the inspector's boots. The corporate representatives realized their vulnerability. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Their entire operation relied on shadows. They turned around without saying a word. They retreated to their sedans and sped away. The raid collapsed in under 8 minutes. The immediate threat vanished in a cloud of exhaust fumes. The news segment aired across the city at 6 o'clock that evening. The public saw the faces of the people living in the margins. The media narrative shifted instantly. These people were no longer nameless squatters. They were the legitimate custodians of local history. Eleanor watched the broadcast from a small television in the lobby. The paralyzing numbness of her recent loss was completely gone. A cold, tactical focus replaced it. She had weaponized the truth. The building was safe for tonight. The war with the developers was far from over, but the first major battle belonged entirely to her. 9 years of profound silence cannot be erased in a single afternoon. Eleanor initially stepped across the rusted threshold, intending to stay for exactly 2 hours. She sought a brief refuge from the autumn rain and the crushing weight of her own memories. Instead, she stumbled into a hidden ecosystem fighting for its existence. The question of her departure vanished. The heavy iron door no longer serves as a barricade against a hostile city. It now functions as a welcoming gate. The transition from a precarious squat to a legally recognized housing cooperative demanded ruthless efficiency. The corporate developers had relied on intimidation and obscure legal loopholes. Eleanor countered with undeniable administrative proof. She utilized the meticulous records preserved by the resident archivist, Thomas. She organized decades of structural blueprints, utility schematics, and forgotten property deeds. Armed with this paper arsenal, she confronted the municipal zoning board. She bypassed the aggressive lawyers and spoke directly to the city planners. She filed petition number 412 under the Abandoned Properties Revitalization Act. The bureaucratic siege lasted for 7 grueling months. Eleanor attended every hearing. She submitted every required inspection report. Victory finally arrived in the form of a heavily stamped blue folder. The building officially belonged to its occupants. This legal recognition triggered an immediate physical metamorphosis within the concrete walls. Julian dismantled his hazardous makeshift ovens in the damp cellar. He secured a legitimate commercial permit for the spacious ground floor. The warm aroma of roasted grain and fresh sourdough now completely masks the old scent of decay. Arthur Miller and his family stepped out of the shadows. They signed formal employment contracts with the newly formed cooperative. They are no longer unseen ghosts desperately keeping the pipes from freezing. They are the official engineers of the estate. The psychological climate of the building shifted alongside its legal status. Elias reacted to the newfound stability. He did not suddenly begin speaking in complex sentences. Instead, he opened a dusty velvet case and retrieved his trumpet. On a quiet Thursday evening, a clear, resonant melody drifted down the central stairwell. It served as a sonic declaration of permanence. The obsessive archivist ceased hoarding random debris. Thomas transferred the specific historical records regarding the man who vanished in 1975 to the State Historical Society. That cold case was finally out of their hands. The ghosts of the past were formally evicted. The residents could focus entirely on the future. Eleanor experienced the most profound transformation. She stopped wearing her heavy winter coat indoors. This minor physical adjustment signaled the end of her internal winter. She finally unpacked the battered leather suitcase she had carried for almost a decade. The temporary shelter crystallized into a permanent foundation. She transformed the derelict front lobby into a functional management office. A large corkboard now displays maintenance schedules and community announcements instead of final eviction notices. She actively directs the daily operations of the property. The paralyzing numbness that defined her life after her personal tragedy has completely evaporated. She negotiates with utility providers. She signs binding contracts. She arbitrates minor disputes between the bakery and the engineering family. Eleanor reclaimed her agency by securing a future for strangers. The rusted threshold is now reinforced steel. She did not merely save a condemned structure from demolition. She engineered her own resurrection. The roots are firmly planted. The silence is gone.